Well, welcome everybody to our Level Up End of Year Fireside Chat, Privacy and AI Governance, a special chat with Michelle Finneran Dennedy. Really happy to have you all here. Apologies for getting started just a couple of minutes late, but we're excited about the conversation today. And before we get started, I'd like to let everybody know that we really want this to be an interactive session. So we encourage you all to use the question and answer panel or the chat panel in your Zoom interface, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. And we're happy to take your questions as we're able to. So to start, let me let you know that my name is Dave Cohen. I'm a director here at Level Up Consulting Partners. I'm going to be your host for today's conversation. I'm joined by my colleague, Wills Catling, who's also a director here at Level Up. Welcome, Wills. Thanks for making some time for us today. Yeah. And with that, I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Michelle Finneran Dennedy. Many of you know from the privacy space that Michelle's been a speaker on many panels and sessions over the past years. She's currently the CEO and founder of Privacy Code and a partner at Privatus Consulting. So prior to that, Michelle held chief privacy roles, original chief privacy roles at Cisco, McAfee, Intel, and Sun Microsystems. She's also served as the CEO of the data company Drumwave. So Michelle, welcome. Thanks for making some time for us today.
Thanks so much for making time for me. It's great to talk to you guys.
Yeah. And just to get started, Michelle, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing recently? Kind of catch people up. I know you've got some exciting works in process here. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've got sort of two simultaneous gigs and they're related going on right now. So we do Privatus Consulting. So it's Brian Lee and myself, and we do strategy consulting. So we're not a law firm. We do strategy to really help you build your programs and think about, working with other large execution firms to do consulting work, to do the execution part, shaping up your programs. We do wicked privacy, which is bringing in multi-stakeholders and figuring out the business cases that you need. Sometimes we do that to attach you onto my other venture, which is Privacy Code. So Privacy Code is a SaaS platform. We do data governance, data privacy, as well as AI, management, ethics, and execution. So we'll talk more about all that kind of stuff today.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue and lead in, Michelle, to what we want to talk about today, which is really how the intersection of AI and privacy governance. So the three of us have all spent well over a decade more in the privacy space, in the privacy field. And it's an exciting moment. This last year in particular has been a very exciting moment with the emergence of AI. And I mean, you just literally cannot turn on any news outlet these days without seeing a headline about artificial intelligence and its potential benefits and risks involved, on a broad scale, culture and society. So it's exciting for those of us in the privacy field because there's a lot of attention been given the privacy profession as potentially some good stewards for AI governance. And that's kind of what we're here to chat about today. So to start off, Michelle, let me ask you, because you've been in the space for a long time and you must be kind of smiling and chuckling to yourself as you see all the recent excitement about artificial intelligence technologies, because you've been involved with these technologies for many, many years now. Can you talk to us a little bit about this recent explosion with the emergence of ChatGPT and Bard and others upon the scene, and the large kind of broad scale public awareness, and how these technologies, where they're at today, as opposed to where they came from and how you've been working with them for many, many years? Just kind of give us a little general overview of the landscape and how you see today as being different.
Yeah, I think it's a bewilderment even to the sort of the progenitors of a lot of these technologies themselves. None of this stuff is new per se, and I think even Microsoft, who put billions and billions into what was a small and kind of failing company called OpenAI themselves, I think it was a shock to them too that a little engine that could, called ChatGPT, almost a year ago to this day, popped out with such commercial success. And I think the real difference is, before we get into what this stuff actually is and what it actually does, is the difference in the sea change that's happened over the last 12 months isn't that there's been a new technology introduced, isn't even the investment in this technology. The difference is that there's been a sea change in the world's imagination. There's been a sea change in the fundamental business imagination. There's been a sea change in public awareness. So little Johnny wants to cheat on his homework at age 12 using generative AI. A salon owner is starting to generate contracts with her, shampoo vendor using a chatbot. The way you're seeing and representations from answers when you're even going to Google, your tried and true search engine has changed because of the way that they're trying to compete and figure out what the advertising models look like using a generative model. So the way I sort of frame it for sort of non-geeky technologists is there's sort of three moments in business and technology where we've met fundamental change. One is payments, when one was able to pay for things 24/7 without physically handing over currency or writing a check that someone would inspect and accept. You could do that 24/7. That was a sea change that changed business forever. The second was being able to look up a fact, search. The dumbest person became the smartest person overnight. That changed forever the way that we think about business and representing ourselves, and change culture overnight. And now it's ChatGPT. So the way that now we aren't looking at necessarily even wikis and amassing sort of research, looking at websites, because each one of those, even the websites, at least had branding cues and some sort of a representation of provenance and origin. What the new wave in this representational and generative version of technology is, it appears to have a statement of fact, whether it is in the visual cues of artificial augmented realities, or it's in the ChatGPT realm where you're giving paragraphs of answers. You're not necessarily getting those answers in a context of a persona or a person or a brand that's saying, I am coming to you from the New York Times. I am coming to you from Level Up Consulting. I'm coming to you from this crazy Michelle Dennedy persona. I'm just coming to you as a statement of fact. And so that changes what this is and the import of what this thing does. And so I think that those three fundamental sort of waves, what do I pay? What do I know? How is it represented as fact? Those are the sort of fundamental things that I keep in the back of my mind as I sort of then start to walk back of what does this now mean in terms of how are we fitting into using it thinking about it as a utility, as a tool, thinking about it as an investment proposition, and then thinking about it, how do we fit and approach things like risk and policy and all the other things that we do as natural sort of horizontal risk and value purveyors in our field.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. So that was actually a really nice way to kind of conceptualize some of the value that's been brought by these tools to people in society and business and commerce in general. So the conversations that are taking place right now about AI governance and AI regulation are all about addressing or potentially addressing the harms or dangers with regards to the use of these technologies. You hinted at one. For those of us that are parents and have kids in school, I mean, it's kind of a yikes moment, right, about our the education system in general. And if, kids are leaning too heavily on these technologies and not doing individual thinking and learning critical thinking skills, there is a potential harm. What are some other harms that you see that you think these calls for regulation and governance are aimed at?
Yeah, I think the harms are the immediate harms are pretty easy to see and pretty easy to be fooled by. Even if you know that they're coming, they're very easy to miss. When a fact is persuasively presented to you, and we'll hear this from Wills. Wills has one of the most persuasive accents. The deep-voiced English voice. We have been trained as a globe to listen to the English voice tells us very persuasively that this thing is the thing, and one must listen to the thing because the thing is correct. And it's really almost hypnotically, it's like hitting in your hippocampus. It's not hitting anywhere here in your associative cortex. And it's part of our socialization that certain things feel very real. So I think it's even that if you know that the harm is that if there's one type of training set data that creates the quote unquote answer, it's very difficult, even if your front brain knows that that might be biased data, for your hindbrain to resist and to seek out other comparative answers. So bias is very, very difficult to avoid. And I think the other part is that intuitively and continuously retraining and seeking out compelling reasons and methodologies to correct for bias is difficult because it's all human.
Yeah.
You know, we look to a machine and it looks clean and it looks non-biased, but all of this stuff is being trained by human data and observing human data. And we have to actually have metadata to train the metadata to not be biased, because even in our attempts, and we were talking about this in preparation for the session, you know, we have this notion of the right to be forgotten, and we say, oh, look at us being so wholesome. Or, you know, we allow people to get rid of stuff they don't like. Well, let's think about that. We've had 5 years since GDPR. What are the types of people who are actually exercising that so-called right? Do we think that they are the type of people who are refugees? Do they think they're people who are economically disadvantaged? Do we think they're people of color? Do we think they're LGBT? I can't even get it the acronym right. You know, people who are of the LGBTQ plus.
Yes.
I bungled that. You know, do we think, you know, so is that are the people who are deleting data sets representative of the community as a whole? And are the data sets that are being deleted and the data sets that remain, does that then change the reality of what the analysis is? So I think that's bias is unto itself its own category of harm. I think the other harm is the harm to inherent creativity. We've seen this and we've heard this for months and months here in the US in particular, with the writers and the actors strikes, where they don't want to be replaced and replicated by executives who are very eager to not pay talent and to have forever young Harrison Ford versus, you know, some young talent who probably is just as talented and more so. And we have nostalgia for old Indiana Jones or young Indiana Jones, as it were. So are we harming ourselves as a society by being nostalgic and having, you know, someone frozen in an aspect and never allowing for replacement?
Right, let alone economically struggling musicians and artists who labor and create this beautiful work, which can then be easily changed and somebody else can make profit off that. Is that fair? Is that, you know, so these questions, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so justice and fairness and progression as a society and new ideas, you know, it's like Ford said, and Ford was no angel himself. You know, if I asked my users what they wanted, they'd want a faster horse. So if all we did is replicate Henry Ford, we'd have a very old Nazi who continuously produced Model Ts. So I think, you know, all of this is kind of interesting to muse upon, but it's very real risk to simply hand over the singularity to a bunch of machines that we don't understand. So I think critical thinking never gets old. I think understanding that these are indeed machines that we're talking about. And I think the other thing that's really, really critical is that there's a certain, it's so early in the game to already hear this sort of nihilist and victimhood that somehow machine learning and quantum computing, and it's all just so hard and there's nothing we can do. That's absolute bunk. We can absolutely take a systematic approach to these models and algorithmic learning and certainly application without saying that we're going to put a stop to innovation. In fact, I think innovation starts right here, right now, and it's beautiful and messy and super complicated. And that's why we're here.
Well, and given that, Michelle, so that's a very articulate way to state the case for the regulation and putting, I love the term guardrails, guardrails. So it's not about stopping or crushing or these technologies and all the fantastic things that can be done with them. It's more about being thoughtful and ethical with the use of these tools. So tying this back to privacy, Wills, over to you. You and I know that in our everyday, day-to-day work with our clients, where we're helping them comply with and adjust their internal systems to be able to handle and guard and be good stewards of people's personal information, it took a number of years in the privacy space for regulations to develop. And as we've all seen over the past few years, regulations, the EU, the directive happened, and that was followed by GDPR. And then here in the United States, we had the landmark piece of California state privacy legislation, which was followed by other state privacy legislation. And then this last year, this almost proliferation or explosion of state privacy laws. So, Will, question for you, given, let's focus for a moment here in the United States, given this proliferation of recent state privacy laws, do you think that that is going to put additional pressure on Congress to kind of revisit and revitalize some of the bills that have been circulated through Congress over the last couple of years for a federal privacy law that could then help do away with this need for patchwork compliance that companies have to currently manage, to create a little bit of ease and harmonization? Or do you think that that's kind of a long shot? What are your thoughts on where that's heading? And to tie in the AI piece, do you think that if that was going to happen, would AI be a piece of that, any kind of new federal privacy legislation?
Thanks, Dave. Yes, I just want to say, Michelle, thank you very much for the very kind comments. However, I actually disagree that it works, because if it worked, then my children would listen to me. And I've known for the last 26 years that it doesn't matter what I say, it seems to go in one ear and out the other ear. So clearly they don't pick up on the accent or whatever it's supposed to engage with for them. But
maybe some AI tools could help you with that.
Yeah, no, let's not go there. I mean, crystal ball time, isn't it? And to be fair, if I knew the answer to this, I'm sure I would be probably sitting on a private yacht somewhere sailing around the Caribbean. But, from my own personal observations, we heard all this last year, ADPPA, which is possibly the worst acronym out there, getting to the end of the 117th Congress. And will Nancy Pelosi and will the Congress push it through as a piece of landmark legislation they could have on the books? And well, we all know the answer, no. So it will be reintroduced for the 118th Congress, and here we are finishing out 2023, which terrifies me. It's another year down, and we're no closer from anything that I've read or heard or seen or people I've spoken to and know. So now we head into 2024, and everybody knows 2024 is an election year in the US. So the chances of a federal privacy bill, whether it's the ADPPA or whether it's something new that gets drafted, is probably, you got to be one of life's optimists, I think, to believe that it would go through next year, especially in our current political situation that we sit in the US. So that pushes you to 2025. And then 2025, who knows what Congress will look like? Who will be sitting in the White House? At this point, we really don't know. And whoever controls Congress and the White House is going to drive forward their own agenda, I would expect. And that means, does the ADPPA die on the vine, and do we try something new, or do they try and resurrect the ADPPA? I really don't know. I think my personal opinion is, if the ADPPA was going to move forward, it would have moved forward by now. I think you've got too much dissension in the ranks. There doesn't seem to be the willingness to make this work from both sides of Congress, and nobody seems to be reaching across to the other side to make it, something that's going to actually happen. So states continue to push forward their own agendas. And when we've seen when the federal government fails, the states will pick up the baton and run with it. And I guess this kind of, I'm going to put this question to Michelle. Are we, by delaying, stalling, whatever we want to use as terminology, a federal bill, running the risks that in the next few years we could see proliferation of state AI bills going into effect? And we've already seen the challenges that organizations face in trying to comply with what could ultimately be 50 different states' privacy regs. How on earth are they going to comply with the potential of 50 state AI regulations?
Yeah, I think it's more, I think if I was a betting person, I think it's very good money at odds on, because it is such a trending issue. It's something that's very populist. It's something that people are very polarized about. This is a man versus machine. Stick it to the big corp. There's a lot of story time and storytelling that can be sort of put into a 30-second blurb that's really surrounding a very complex set of issues. And stop the machines, stop the processing, kind of unionizing the humans versus the machines, all of it being absolutely inadequate as talking about actually doing something to protect the human being at the center of all of this processing. So yes, I think we will absolutely see states, and then we'll see this recalcitrance of there's a passion around having no preemption. I do not feel that way. I think a good federal law, absolutely, we should have preemption. We should have, and that doesn't mean centralized power. You can absolutely have attorneys general having powerful local reviews. You can have local flavors. There's a lot of different ways that lawmakers have had local community controls that respect the absolute diversity that is the United States of America, and still allow for commerce. I mean, this is the ultimate commerce clause, that AI cannot be regulated appropriately within one state-bound jurisdiction, whether it's an impact clause or whether it is an origin or a tax kind of a clause. So I think that it gets messier. I think that it's different types of people that are doing the regulation. And I don't think that we're helping ourselves with all of this privacy law proliferation state by state. And in fact, if we were able to actually kind of open up the candy box of what's actually going down within companies to protect individuals and not fiefdoms, we'd find that these state laws have harmed the individual, because we're doing more on sort of covering our collective behinds on DSARs and less to go deep into the data center to make sure that our employees and our customers and our potential customers are being protected.
Well, and back to discrimination, you've got certain residents of certain states with rights and certain residents of other states without rights. And back to the preemption question, that's kind of interesting. So would you, Michelle, be in favor of a federal law that sets a floor, not a ceiling, and then allowing states to be able to pass more stringent laws should they choose to do so?
So I'll hang myself either way on a yes/no answer to that question, because it depends. It's
of course it depends.
Really mouth answer to say it depends, right?
It's too nuanced to be able to give a general answer, right? Yeah.
The problem is that what we call stringent, in my mind, often is not. We call it stringent if we have a lot of paperwork to do, and I don't find that stringent. I find stringent, and again, deep bias. Privacy engineering to me starts with the individual. And so if the individual does, and we don't have a systemic approach, and we don't have even a start made on how we're actually protecting an individual, I don't care how many nanners I've got paperwork to fill out and how many representations. There's a bill floating around in New York about show us all your processing flips every year. Great. So we're going to suddenly inundate the State House with a bunch of log files.
Yes.
How does that protect a person? And a DSAR request where you just have a pile, a giant file, and I'll ask for them periodically just out of curiosity, like what do I get back when I ask for a DSAR request? You get a giant log file.
Indecipherable, yeah.
And I'm pretty good at this stuff.
Yeah.
And even if I attach some BI on top of that and try to process that and make sense of it, what does it mean? Can I go back and am I any better protected? No, I'm not better protected. So yes, it's good because it caused a little bit more awareness and we had to do a little bit more investment and maybe we locked a few more things down. I think what actually happened is a lot of stuff we thought we could ignore because we thought we could encrypt our way out of it, or we thought that we thought that anonymization actually could work.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality was we didn't have a systemic approach. We didn't have the respect for person data that we needed to have. It wasn't truly a true chief privacy officer. And that chief privacy officer is not someone who sits in legal and disassociates herself from the technical side of the house. You must coordinate, cooperate, fight, piss off, and then reconcile with your technical partners. Mm-hmm. You must have conflict with your vendor team and then kiss and make nice again. You must have your marketing people share budget with you. You must capture budget. Mm-hmm. You must buy tools. You must not continually say, oh, I've got a junior hire, but I don't have a tool set, or I'm just renewing with a vendor that I know doesn't do the job that they said they were going to do. One vendor, and I have no plans to replace that vendor that I know doesn't work, and I'm going to complain to you at every conference when I see you about that vendor. You're not doing your job. Yeah. So how in the world are we going to do that with 10 more states coming online? Mm-hmm. So I think we need to step up as a privacy profession and start doing our jobs with love. I'm working harder than ever. I think we're all working harder than ever. I think we need to be really going out to these state houses and saying, what is the thing that we think we're going to achieve with a coordinated effort across jurisdictions? It's not writing a better SEC to do data transfer. It's not a better treaty. Here's an end-to-end ideal customer journey. How do we protect that? Mm-hmm. There's security involved, there's permissioning involved, there's audit involved, whether that's an individual customer. I don't think a customer should have the burden of doing your job of audit. Mm-hmm. And end to end. So I know that's a lot to ask, but man, oh, Manischewitz, I think we need to start being honest with ourselves. And when this turns into AI, which is what we're talking about today, it goes on a J curve of complexity and harm. So I think the privacy people are the right ones to be a part of the AI discussion if they are courageous and brave and willing to do the work.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to get to that in a minute. In doing some preparation for the conversation today, I stumbled upon an article, which I was a little surprised to see was from 2020, that was written by Cam Carey for the Brookings Institute. And he, as part of his analysis there, was asking or advocating for a shift of responsibility and burden back to the companies and off of the individual consumers to have to, as you say, ask for these indecipherable log files as part of it. So yeah, that really resonated. And so, Michelle, you just talked about a number of processes and techniques and governing strategies that are very familiar to privacy professionals that have been developed over these last couple of decades. And something we talked about in preparation for this conversation was we've been to some IAPP conferences recently where there's been a big emphasis on AI and AI governance, and clearly the concept has been put forward that privacy professionals are in a good place to be able to have a role in AI governance. And I know we've got a lot of differing opinions out there about what role that should be for privacy professionals. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that? Where do you see the privacy professionals sitting within these new obligations to come up with governance strategies and frameworks for companies?
Yeah. So, and I know there's different views even in the privacy community. I mean, LinkedIn was going on fuego a little bit because there were some well-known folks saying, no, we shouldn't have a part of this. We've got enough to do. And then others are like, what are you talking about? I have a very biased view. Since I started, I was legal support for privacy back in 2000, and then left the legal group to do as a chief privacy officer with legal support at my back, or backing me up, not at my back, but you know what I'm saying, to become as chief privacy officer in 2002. So I've been at this for a long time. And at that point, Sun Microsystems was, the network is the computer. And we were talking about middleware and IoT. And almost immediately, and that's when I started calling home for help. And my mom was an IP lawyer, and my dad was a systems engineer and security guy. And so I'd be like, oh, Dad, they're talking about this thing. Is this right? Does this work? And that's also when I worked with my current CTO and lead architect, Rich Schaefer, about how do you protect a distributed network. And it's also when I got into like Jeff Ritter's work in quantum, what he calls quantum law. How do you protect individual IP transactions, which is how I view privacy, in a world where the jurisdiction changes almost as quickly as the digital transaction happens? And then what we realized is, and back then, we got great people like Sandy Hughes and Barb Lawler talking about RFID. So what happens in the hypothetical world? And I'm purposely talking about the old examples because this is how far back it goes. What happens if it's legal in one jurisdiction to put an RFID chip under the skin of an incarcerated person with all of the alleged crimes, and it's legal in that jurisdiction? So by definition, the legal is actually the lesser of the ethical, commonly understood rules of society in that jurisdiction. And yet the middleware signal is going back to the state of California, the country of the United States of America, and then being down processed in India and up processed in Europe. So at what point does that data about a very specifically carbon-based human, if we're serious about protecting human data and privacy is a human right, at what point in our minds do we believe that ceases to be so? Or do we instead reverse the transaction and go, the end of the processing journey was Europe, but we say the corpus of this entire orchestration is about a human being and his or her right to be a self-determinative, free person at some point.
There's always been that huge disconnect between the legal world being geographically jurisdictional and the world of commerce, since the emergence of digital commerce being without borders.
And what do we do?
And how do we reconcile those two regimes, right?
Well, so very, very early on, we were starting to think about these issues, and so that's when I started this stack, and it's done me well for over the years. And I call it the 4-part stack. Is there's morality, there's ethics, there's legality, and then there's sustainability. And I mean that is as commercial sustainability as much as economic and the earth, right? But I mean, like, true, like, doesn't make sense commercially. But I start with morality. In the case of the under the skin chipping, for me, that hit my moral button of, I feel like that was so far beyond what human beings should do, regardless of anything, that was something I said, like, all the other things, it was ethical for that society. It was legal there. Commercially, we were about to make a lot of money, and we could put all of the governance around it that it could make sense. But for me personally, I said, if we decide to do this, I'm going to resign, because I can't, morally, that's not something I would do. And that's not something I want to be a part of. And thankfully, our CEO at the time said, I agree. And we put this chip in the uniform. And that was the solution around that. But it was very instructive to me, because it says that you can make a contribution that has a material impact on people's lives, because it absolutely was legal, and it absolutely was something that was like, this made sense to a lot of people in that space and time and in that moment. And it was a lot of money, and it was one person against a lot of power and money. And I had neither of those things at that time at all. But that's how we started to build our practice of if you have a structure that structurally allows for morality, ethics, and I view ethics, with all apologies to real ethicists, of these are publicly agreed upon rules of the road. So like when you drive on the left or the right, that's sort of the ethics of the road, right? It's also legal, like you can't cross that line, but there are sometimes there's you're driving through a grassy field because this road is flooded. That's when you rely on ethics, and that's where we are with AI, because there's laws yet to be written, and yet we have a common community understanding that we share with one another publicly. We signal to each other literally, because we're deciding, oh, look at that. So by having a structure in place early on in privacy, when we really didn't have even the nation state laws under the 95 directive weren't all put in place when we first started self-designating as chief privacy officers. By having this structure and designating like, hey, this is how a chief privacy officer, like, oh, BT dubs, this didn't exist, so we're going to call ourselves chief privacy officers. By the way, we're going to set up this thing called a privacy and a data council. That didn't exist before, but that was another one of our signals that this is how we're going to demonstrate ethics. This is how we're going to demonstrate what we do by training. And it wasn't just a recitation of the laws. It was like, here's the decisions that companies like us. So, like Nuala was at GE at the time, like, hey, Nuala, how do you do this? And then it was like, well, other conglomerate companies that have to make cross-jurisdictional trade-offs do this. And we take this higher road here. Or this thing over here, if you tried to do it this way, it's not sustainable across the stack. And that's when, and that's also actually when groups started to glue together. And that's when IPP started to buy other smaller meetups. And we started doing, cross-functionalizing and going to Dataversity and RSA and all of these other groups that we go to now too. So I think that's where we've always been. And I think that's where we need to double down on now, is the privacy profession in its infancy was forced by its nascency to be an ethics profession as well as a legal profession because there were no rules. Now there's tons and tons of rules. In fact, we're choking on every new law. You can't keep up anymore. And so now we're sort of like back to that beginning again, but we know that we can do that because we've always done that. So I think I think the best thing to do is to begin again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Michelle. And one of the key things that I heard you say that I was really picked up on, and Wills, I'd like to turn to you next for this, is this idea of, as we begin to think about the best structures within organizations to make ethical decisions, to evaluate these new powerful technologies as to whether they are going to be helpful or harmful to our customers, our consumers, and our society in general, is this idea of an ethics committee or an ethics board, just like we've had privacy committees, privacy boards. And it's my belief that, key to that is the fact that you get people that really care from multiple departments, multiple perspectives weighing in. And as you say, Michelle, coming up with this commonly understood idea that this is a good thing to do and a right thing to do and falls in with our company mission, or it doesn't. And so this is going to be critical in risk analysis. So, Wills, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that we've seen and heard recently about how to one of the ways, or some of the ways that we can mitigate risk of using these AI technologies within companies, and kind of where that's heading.
Yeah, sure, Dave. And again, I do have a question for Michelle. It's listening to you talk about how the world of the privacy professional has changed and the chief privacy officer has changed over the last 15 years that we've known each other. It would be interesting also, I think, for the audience to hear, what are your thoughts on where the privacy professional goes from here forward? Because like you said, building up to where we are today, you came into this profession, a lot of people came into privacy off the back of a legal or law-backed background, and as you say, we're buried in laws and regulations and compliance requirements, and we seem to be now we've now had that initial shift post GDPR almost, where technology has exploded onto the scene, So we've had that first wave of pets that, you know, if you go on the IEPP's website, you can pull up vendors, and there's, you know, where there used to be a dozen, there's hundreds, if not thousands now, I've lost count, providing everything that you could need in any different cut, size, or format. You know, pick your own poison, I guess.
I don't think there's one for privacy engineering yet. I was really surprised. That's why privacy code's not there yet. There wasn't a category for me yet.
I was going to say, and that's you know, something I would do want to ask you about as well as privacy engineering. But you know, as the chief privacy officer or privacy managers or people getting into this profession moving forward, do you think that, you know, yes, you're still going to need that legal side of the brain within the privacy group, because somebody's going to have to read and decipher and make opinions on the regs that are out there, but more and more so. And I'm going to steal your term because I love it, but that lizard side of your brain for technology is going to become as critically important as the legal side. So those who want to grow in this profession are either going to have to retrain, re-educate, or just be somebody who already lives in that kind of those two worlds, like you've lived in those two worlds all of your life.
Yep. Yeah, I think, and you know, like, there's nothing wrong with the nice lizard. You know, they dwell in light and shadow. I think you know, like, so when I graduated from law school, I went into patent law because I love applied technology, and you know, I have an affinity for what is new and non-obvious, and so I think that's the adventure in privacy, is the complexity of personhood. You know, we're protecting personal data, and so that is as complex as the soon to be 10 billion humans that are floating around, like every context, every opinion, every withdrawal of consent. That's why machine learning applied to human data is so fascinating to me, because now we can actually scale the size of opinion. But what does that mean is, holy crap, we can elect really bad people to lead us. And we, you know, have to make really hard decisions that we're going to be wrong a lot. I think that's the other part. I think people ask me all the time, you know, to your point about how's it changed to be a privacy officer? You know, how did you get into being a privacy officer? The answer for me is like, I don't know. There wasn't a route to follow. It was a bad idea for me to leave IP. I mean, I live in Silicon Valley, and I was an intellectual property lawyer. I was a patent litigator before I did this, and I did M&A transactions, doing valuations for IP. It was the dumbest thing in the world to do privacy. Like, why didn't I go to a venture fund and sit on a yacht like everybody else? I still can't answer that question. You know, I was offered the number 7 job at Google to do Sarbanes-Oxley law, and I said, that sounds boring, and that would have been a very big, expensive job. None of those people work anymore.
Hindsight, right? Hindsight.
I'm going to come to Michelle for career advice following this call.
Well, come to me for career advice. Just don't come to me for financial, like, remuneration career advice. But, and I did very well over the years. And privacy officers make a lot of money now. And we are a career, we are a profession. So, and it's a fascinating and a wonderful and a purpose-driven profession that I love dearly. How your path is going to be is totally up to you, which I also love. So I think how it has changed, it is so full of opportunity right now. You still need a ton of courage to do it well. I think the biggest difference is, when we first started, unanimously you had to be courageous, and unanimously you had to ask for help, and unanimously you knew you were going to make mistakes, and you knew that you weren't going to have a lot of the things that you needed, so you just went out and did it. And so a lot of times now I hear people waiting. It's the word I hate the most. I'm waiting to get budget. I'm waiting to get promoted. I'm waiting for something to get developed. I'm waiting for a law to pass. There's no waiting in baseball.
Yeah.
There's no waiting. Like, if you're going to wait, it's going to change anyway.
Get up and do it and make it happen. Yeah.
have to make it happen. And that's the fun in it. You're going to be wrong. And that's the beautiful thing about ethics too, is, the thing that FTX did wrong, there's so many things FTX did wrong, the thing that Theranos did wrong, and the thing that OpenID is sort of doing wrong in front of us is not OpenID. Am I saying that wrong?
AI.
Yeah, I was saying OpenID is something totally different.
Yeah.
OpenAI, like they should have a very transparent statement of what their ethics are. What ethical framework are they following? They cannot say, they have not said, and they should absolutely, like, they have the emphasis on the payroll. And what they're trying to do is they think that they are 10 years ahead of where they are. They're not fooling anyone. They just started. I'm not expecting them to be perfect. They're prancing around and pretending to be better than everyone else is the error. So I think that's the lesson we can all draw from that. Forget about those particular people. Do not wait for answers from the people who have the most money right now, because wait 5 years, who knows what they're going to do. We have just as good of answers as they have right now. So have that confidence right now. Draw from our experience right now. We have people like Denise Chenet, who's over at Intel. She has been doing we used to call it responsible future tech. Now we call it responsible AI. She's been evaluating bias in algorithms and provenance of algorithms ever since I hired her back when I was there at McAfee Intel. She has years and years and years of, we used to call her the engineer whisperer, because she could get them to disclose anything, even when they were like shy about like, oh, it's not quite built yet. There are people like out there. We've got Allison Bergman, who was at Adobe for 1,000 years, who's at Fanatics, years and years and years of experience with this sort of question and answer in the seams. Sam Willman over at Xerox, years and years and years. So there's a lot of folks out there who have just been quietly and sort of fantastically doing the work that can teach us and lead us and help us write things down and build that same community that we did in privacy in this sort of continuous field. I don't view neural networks or deep learning or computer vision as something different. It's simply, applied data, whether it's IP, whether it's personalized or not, whether you can anonymize it in AI, I don't think so. And that's why I can't see a world where privacy is not involved in this world.
Yeah.
And Michelle, you talk about privacy involved, and that just brings me to one other question that I wanted to ask you. And obviously privacy professionals are in a great position to support AI governance and the build out of AI programs, because we've gone through the implementation of massive programs that affect globally your organization, putting in place controls and frameworks and principles. And so, looking at what the privacy professional has already done, building out their privacy program, their privacy framework, their committees, their governance, their operating models, etc. How do you see that being able to be applied to developing out a trustworthy AI framework for an organization?
Well, so this is the only shilliness I'll be on this podcast, but I mean, I've built 3 different frameworks and 3 different flavors already into the privacy code platform. So we know how to do it. We know how to break it down into task by task, segment by segment, help you measure it, help you prove it, help you build it, hold your hand, work with us, help, if you need bodies, Level Up can help you level up. If you need strategy to get there before you've done that, we can grab Brian over and do the Wicked Privacy workshops and get you a business strategy, get you a board deck ready to roll, get you on privacy code, get you leveled up. I mean, there are a lot of things that we can do. We've built these programs before. We can build them again. They're not unknown. We know how to do it. So I don't know how to otherwise to say it without being shilly, but ask for help, raise your hand and ask for help. We actually know how to do it. And that's part of the reason I'm not building yet another program again. That was sort of the crossroads I was at, is like I built all these programs over and over again. And the question in my head was sort of an existential one of, I was thinking about going back to Carnegie and teaching full-time, not full-time, but as an adjunct once a semester again, and doing privacy engineering. and it was wonderful. And, 8 students at a time, lovely and wonderful, but that's 8 students at a time, or doing another program, one company at a time. Or I thought, what if I built a tool and I could pass my torch on and teach everyone what I know, what I learned from my mom and dad, what I learned from all of my mentors, and I pass my torch. And then, maybe hundreds of thousands of people can learn what we all learned, because we learned this all the hard way. And that's why it's a content-led platform that is intended for people much smarter than me, who were not pioneers, who learned how to build with trucks and concrete and not wood and sticks, to come along and build on top of that. So we built the starter kit for you, and so you can build your empires on top of it. That's the plan.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much, Michelle. And unfortunately, we've hit the top of the hour, so we're just about out of time here. But that's a great note to end on. And I also wanted to pick up on one of the last things that you were mentioning in your closing comments there, which is there are all these wonderful people that have blazed the trail through privacy that are out there, that are available. They have all this built-up expertise. And again, back to privacy and AI and all the sessions and conferences that have been happening lately. One of the big takeaways is one of the best ways to get going with your AI compliance is to have people, knowledgeable, caring, thoughtful people in the loop at critical decision points. So take that away as a place to get started, and good luck to all of you out there with your privacy and AI compliance challenges. Obviously, contact us if you are looking for some help with that. We can be reached at levelup.com. And so, Michelle, one more time, thanks so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure talking with you. I feel like we could go on and on. Maybe we'll have to do another one in the early part of the next year. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you making some time for us.
Thanks, Jen. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Michelle.
Have a happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.